October 8, 1944. The Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich crouched behind his MG-42 machine gun, watching the tree line through the morning mist. His hands rested on the weapon's grip, fingers ready to unleash what German soldiers called Hitler's Buzzsaw. For 2 years on the Eastern Front, this weapon had been his guarantee of survival. The Russians would charge. The MG-42 would cut them down. Always the same pattern, always the same result. But the Americans approaching through those trees were about to demonstrate something Dietrich had never encountered, something Soviet tactics manuals had never prepared him for, something that would fundamentally challenge everything German infantry doctrine taught about machine gun superiority in defensive warfare. What Dietrich did not know, what no German soldier positioned in those concrete pillboxes and earthen bunkers could have anticipated, was that American rifle squads had developed a tactical innovation so effective, so devastating in its simplicity, that it would render the feared MG-42's rate of fire advantage nearly irrelevant. They called it walking fire, and it represented a revolution in small unit tactics made possible by a single weapon, the M1 Garand rifle. The story of how American infantrymen learned to suppress German machine gun positions with semi-automatic rifles begins not in the forests of Germany, but in the foundries and armories of the United States in the 1920s and 30s, and in the tactical laboratories of American infantry training grounds, where officers were quietly rewriting the rules of fire and maneuver. The German MG-42, introduced in 1942, represented the pinnacle of machine gun design. Its rate of fire, between 1,200 and 1,500 rounds per minute, was approximately double that of any comparable weapon. The American Browning .30 caliber machine gun fired at 400 to 600 rounds per minute. 500 to 520 rounds per minute. The Soviet Degtyaryov fired at 550 rounds per minute. The MG-42's cyclic rate was so high that individual shots blended into a continuous ripping sound, earning it the nickname Hitler's Buzzsaw among Allied soldiers and Hitlersäger among Germans themselves. The weapon's design reflected German tactical doctrine developed through the First World War and refined during the interwar period. German infantry squads, typically consisting of 9 to 10 men, were built around the machine gun. The MG-42 was the primary weapon. The rifleman existed to support it, to carry ammunition, to protect the gun crew, to suppress enemies threatening the gun position. This was fundamentally different from American and British doctrine, where machine guns supported riflemen. Hauptfeldwebel Ernst Weber, a machine gun instructor at the Wehrmacht Infantry School in Hammelburg, wrote in his training manual dated March 1943, "The machine gun is the decisive weapon of the infantry squad. All other weapons exist to enable the machine gun to deliver effective fire. The rifle is a secondary weapon, useful for security and for engaging targets not worthy of machine gun ammunition. The squad leader's primary responsibility is ensuring the machine gun can fire without interruption." This doctrine had proven devastatingly effective on the Eastern Front. Soviet infantry tactics throughout 1941 and 1942 relied heavily on mass assaults. Soviet rifle squads, equipped primarily with Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifles, would advance in waves toward German positions. The MG-42 crews would wait until the Soviets closed to within 200 to 300 meters, then open fire. The high rate of fire allowed a single MG-42 to engage multiple targets almost simultaneously, the gun traversing left and right across advancing formations, cutting down dozens of men in seconds. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Soviet casualties from machine gun fire in the early war period were catastrophic. German after-action reports from the Battle of Moscow in December 1941 routinely documented Soviet rifle companies, typically 100 to 120 men, reduced to 20 or 30 effective soldiers after encountering prepared German machine gun positions. The MG-42's rate of fire meant that even if Soviet soldiers went prone immediately upon taking fire, the gun could engage the entire formation before men hit the ground. Gefreiter Hans Keller, an MG-42 gunner with the 6th Infantry Division, kept a diary throughout his service on the Eastern Front. His entry from July 12, 1943, during the Battle of Kursk, provides detailed insight into the weapon's effectiveness. We occupied positions on the reverse slope of Hill 252. The Soviets attacked at dawn, approximately 3 companies, perhaps 300 men. We waited until they crested the hill at 150 meters range. 3 MG-42 seconds opened fire simultaneously. The entire Soviet first wave, at least 100 men, was down within 30 seconds. The second wave hesitated, then continued advancing. We fired another sustained burst, perhaps 10 seconds. The second wave went to ground. The third wave broke and retreated. We had fired approximately 1,500 rounds total, perhaps 2 minutes of actual firing. Soviet casualties appeared to exceed 150 men. We suffered no casualties. German confidence in the MG-42's dominance was not mere propaganda or self-delusion. The weapon genuinely provided enormous tactical advantages in defensive operations. Its high rate of fire created what German tactical manuals called fire superiority, the ability to deliver more projectiles toward the enemy than the enemy could deliver in return. This superiority allowed German infantry, often outnumbered, to hold positions against numerically superior Soviet forces. The weapon's design facilitated rapid barrel changes, essential given the tremendous heat generated by sustained fire. A trained crew could change barrels in less than 6 seconds. Each MG-42 crew carried at least 1 spare barrel, often 2 or 3. This meant the gun could maintain effective fire almost indefinitely, limited only by ammunition supply, not by barrel overheating. The ammunition feed system used 50-round belts that could be linked together for continuous fire. German machine gun crews would typically prepare 250-round belts before combat, linking 5 50-round belts together. This meant the gun could fire for approximately 10 to 12 seconds continuously before requiring a belt change. In practical terms, a well-trained crew could maintain almost continuous fire, the assistant gunner feeding new belts while the gunner continued firing. When German units transferred from the Eastern Front to face American forces in Italy, France, and northwestern Europe in 1943 and 1944, they carried with them absolute confidence in their machine gun doctrine. Soviet infantry had proven unable to overcome German machine gun positions through direct assault. German soldiers had no reason to believe American infantry would prove any more effective. They were about to discover how wrong that assumption was. The American M1 Garand rifle, adopted in 1936 and issued to all U.S. infantry by 1941, represented a fundamental shift in infantry firepower that most German intelligence officers had failed to fully appreciate. While German, British, Soviet, and Japanese infantry carried bolt-action rifles requiring manual operation between each shot, American infantrymen carried a semi-automatic rifle that fired as fast as they could pull the trigger. The distinction seemed minor to observers focused on machine guns as the primary infantry weapon. A semi-automatic rifle still fired 1 shot per trigger pull. The rate of fire might be slightly faster than a bolt action, but surely not enough to threaten the devastating firepower of a machine gun firing 1,200 rounds per minute. This analysis missed the crucial point. The question was not whether an individual rifle could match a machine gun's rate of fire. The question was whether an entire rifle squad, all armed with semi-automatic weapons, could collectively deliver enough fire to suppress a machine gun position long enough for maneuver elements to close with and destroy it. American tactical doctrine, developed and refined throughout the 1930s at the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, was built around this precise concept. American rifle squads, typically 12 men, were organized into 2 fire teams of 6 men each. Each fire team included a Browning automatic rifle, essentially a fully automatic magazine-fed rifle, plus 5 men armed with M1 Garands. The doctrine, codified in FM 7-10, Infantry Rifle Company, published in 1942, emphasized fire and movement. One fire team would deliver suppressive fire, while the other maneuvered. Unlike German doctrine, which positioned riflemen as supporting elements for the machine gun, American doctrine positioned every rifle as a significant source of firepower. The squad leader's responsibility was not to protect a single weapon, but to coordinate the fire of 12 weapons to achieve tactical objectives. Captain Paul Hamilton, an instructor at the infantry school from 1939 to 1942, later wrote in his memoir published in 1953, "We spent considerable time analyzing the problem of assaulting prepared defensive positions. The traditional approach, dating from the First World War, was to suppress enemy positions with machine gun and mortar fire, then assault with riflemen who would advance in rushes, taking cover frequently. This worked adequately against bolt-action rifles, but required extensive supporting fire. We began to ask whether rifle squads armed entirely with semi-automatic weapons might generate sufficient firepower to suppress enemy positions without external support. The answer, after extensive field testing, was yes, but it required new tactics. The tactic that emerged from this analysis was walking fire, though it went by several names in various training manuals: marching fire, assault fire, and sometimes simply advancing under fire. The concept was straightforward in theory, but required extensive training to execute effectively in combat. A rifle squad approaching an enemy position would deploy in a skirmish line, men spread approximately 5 to 10 yards apart. As they closed to within 100 to 150 yards of the enemy position, they would begin firing while continuing to advance. Not aimed fire at specific targets, but suppressive fire directed at the general area of the enemy position. Each rifleman would fire at a steady, rapid pace, 2 to 3 rounds every few seconds, while walking forward. The Browning automatic rifle gunners would fire longer bursts, 5 to 10 rounds, then pause to change magazines. The effect was a continuous stream of rifle fire impacting around and on the enemy position. The volume of fire was not as heavy as a machine gun, but it was sustained. It was coming from multiple directions, as the skirmish line spread across the front, and critically, it was advancing closer with every second. The psychological impact on defenders was profound. Soldiers under fire instinctively seek cover. When fire comes from a single machine gun position, defenders can locate the source, identify safe areas, and return effective fire. But when fire comes from 8 to 10 rifles spread across 50 to 80 yards of front, all firing continuously while advancing, there is no single point to return fire toward. Rounds are impacting continuously, forcing defenders to remain behind cover, and the source of fire is getting closer. For machine gunners, the tactical problem was severe. The MG-42's tremendous rate of fire was an advantage when engaging massed targets or targets at a single point, but against a dispersed advancing skirmish line, the high rate of fire became a liability. The gunner could engage 1 or 2 men in the advancing line, but by the time he traversed to another target, the men he had been shooting at had either taken cover or continued advancing. The machine gun was expending ammunition at an enormous rate, but achieving limited results because targets were spread across the entire front. German machine gun doctrine assumed that attacking forces would go to ground when taken under fire, allowing the machine gun to dominate the battlefield through sustained fire on fixed positions. American walking fire tactics deliberately refused to go to ground. The advancing riflemen accepted casualties, and walking fire advances did suffer casualties, but maintained forward momentum, closing the range continuously, while keeping the enemy under constant fire. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, a platoon leader with the 352nd Infantry Division, experienced walking fire tactics for the first time during the Normandy campaign in June 1944. His account, recorded in a post-war interview in 1947, captures the disorientation German soldiers felt when encountering these tactics. "We occupied positions overlooking Omaha Beach, My platoon included 2 MG-42 teams positioned to cover the beach approaches. When American infantry began advancing from the beach, we engaged them at approximately 200 meters. The machine guns opened fire. We expected the Americans to go to ground, as Soviet infantry did, as British infantry did. Instead, they continued advancing while firing. Not wild firing, but steady, continuous firing. Every American soldier appeared to be firing constantly. Bullets were impacting all around our positions. Splinters of concrete, dirt. The air itself seemed filled with bullets. My machine gunners continued firing, but I could see they were disturbed. The Americans were not stopping. They were not seeking cover. They were walking forward, rifles firing continuously, and they were getting closer. Bauer's account continues with the outcome of this engagement. The Americans reached 100 meters, then 75 meters, still firing, still advancing. One of my machine gun crews was killed, I believe by rifle fire, though there was so much firing I could not tell. The second crew ceased firing, not because they were hit, but because the gunner told me later he was certain he would be hit if he remained at the gun. The Americans were too close, firing too heavily. He abandoned the position and fell back. My riflemen, armed with Car-9 8K bolt-action rifles, could not generate sufficient return fire. They were operating their bolts, firing one shot, working the bolt, firing another shot, while the Americans fired continuously. The volume of fire was not comparable. We retreated from our positions. The Americans took the position without using artillery, without using tanks, using only rifle fire. This pattern repeated across Normandy, Italy, and later in the campaign in northwestern Europe. German defenders, confident in their machine gun positions, discovered that American rifle squads could suppress those positions through sheer volume of fire, even without supporting weapons. The M1 Garands' 8-round capacity, loaded via an en-bloc clip that ejected automatically when empty, meant American riflemen could maintain fire with only brief pauses to reload. A trained rifleman could fire 8 rounds, reload, and resume firing in less than 5 seconds. Gefreiter Otto Schneider, an MG-42 gunner captured at Aachen in October 1944, provided detailed technical analysis during his interrogation by American intelligence officers. The interrogation report, preserved in the National Archives, includes this exchange. Question: how did American infantry tactics differ from Soviet tactics? Answer: the Soviets relied on mass and momentum. They would attack in waves, accepting terrible casualties, but eventually overwhelming positions through numbers. We could defeat Soviet attacks if we had sufficient ammunition and fields of fire. American tactics were different. American squads were smaller, but every man carried a semi-automatic rifle. When they attacked, they advanced slowly but continuously, all rifles firing. The volume of fire was extraordinary for such small units. We could not effectively engage them because remaining at the gun meant being hit by rifle fire. The Americans were not more brave than the Soviets, but their weapons allowed them to generate suppressive fire while advancing, which Soviet bolt-action rifles could not do. The tactical revolution, represented by walking fire, extended beyond simply suppressing machine gun positions. It fundamentally altered the mathematics of infantry combat. Traditional infantry doctrine, based on experience from the First World War through the early Second World War, assumed that attackers needed a significant numerical advantage, typically 3-1, to successfully assault prepared defensive positions. This ratio reflected the defensive advantages of machine guns and the difficulties attacking forces faced in generating sufficient suppressive fire to enable maneuver. American rifle squads using walking fire tactics routinely attacked German positions at near parity or even numerical disadvantage. A single American rifle squad, 12 men, could successfully assault German positions held by equivalent or larger forces, something that would have been tactically inadvisable with bolt-action rifles. The key was sustained, continuous fire while advancing, which only semi-automatic weapons enabled. Colonel S.L.A. Marshall, a combat historian who conducted extensive after-action interviews with American soldiers throughout the war, documented walking fire tactics in his book Men Against Fire, published in 1947. Marshall wrote, "The M1 rifle's semi-automatic capability transformed infantry tactics in ways that senior officers did not fully anticipate when the weapon was adopted. Junior leaders, squad leaders, and platoon leaders discovered through practical experience that they could advance against enemy positions while maintaining continuous fire. This was not taught explicitly in pre-war training manuals, but emerged organically from small unit actions in North Africa and Italy. By Normandy, it had become standard practice in experienced units. The Germans never developed an effective counter to this tactic because it exploited their doctrinal weakness, their over-reliance on machine gun firepower, and their infantry's lack of individual firepower due to bolt-action rifles. The training required to execute walking fire effectively was not complex, but it required discipline and confidence that came only through experience. New replacement troops arriving in combat units often struggled with the concept. The instinct when under fire is to seek cover, to stop moving, to make oneself as small a target as possible. Walking fire required soldiers to suppress that instinct, to continue advancing toward enemy fire while themselves firing continuously. Sergeant William Bradford, a squad leader with the 1st Infantry Division who fought in North Africa, Sicily, and northwestern Europe, described the training process in a post-war oral history interview conducted in 1948. New men would join the squad, replacements after we took casualties. First time we'd tell them to advance with walking fire, they'd freeze up or go to ground after a few steps. Natural reaction. You hear bullets, you hit the dirt. We'd have to drill it into them. You keep moving forward. You keep firing. You don't aim at individual targets. You aim at the area where the enemy is. You fire 2. 3 rounds. You take 2. 3 steps. You fire again. You maintain the rhythm. Fire, step, fire, step. The idea is that your fire keeps their heads down, which lets you get closer, which makes your fire more effective, which keeps their heads down more, which lets you get closer still. It's a cycle, but you have to maintain the advance. The moment you stop, you lose the advantage. Bradford's account emphasizes the psychological dimension of walking fire. The Germans had excellent soldiers, well-trained, brave men. But when you're a machine gunner and you see 8-10 Americans walking toward you, all firing continuously, bullets hitting all around your position, you have a choice. You can stay at your gun and try to return fire, knowing you're probably going to get hit. Or you can take cover and wait for them to get close enough for grenades, or for your riflemen to stop them. Most machine gunners chose the second option. And their riflemen couldn't stop us because they had bolt-action rifles. They'd fire 1 shot while we fired 3-4 shots. The mathematics favoured us. The ammunition expenditure required for walking fire was considerable. A rifleman executing walking fire might expend 40 to 60 rounds during a 100-yard advance, potentially 5 to 7 full clips from his M1 Garand. This was far higher than the ammunition expenditure for traditional fire and movement tactics, where riflemen would fire from covered positions, then advance in rushes with weapons silent. American logistics, however, could support this expenditure. Each rifleman carried 80 rounds in his cartridge belt as standard load, plus additional bandoliers when available. Ammunition resupply was generally adequate in all theatres, with only occasional shortages during rapid advances. German forces, by contrast, faced increasing ammunition constraints as the war progressed. Machine gun ammunition, in particular, became scarce by late 1944, German MG-42. Crews were often restricted to limited daily allocations, sometimes as few as 500 to 1,000 rounds per gun per day. When facing American walking fire assaults, machine gunners had to balance the need to suppress attacking forces against the need to conserve ammunition. Many German after-action reports from the period cite ammunition shortages as a critical factor in failed defences. Oberst Heinrich Müller, commander of the 275th Infantry Division's 984th Grenadier Regiment, wrote in his final report before the regiment's destruction in the Hürtgen Forest in November 1944, American infantry tactics place impossible demands on our ammunition supply. When they attack, they advance continuously under covering fire from their semi-automatic rifles. To suppress this advance, our machine guns must fire almost continuously. A single American squad attack may require 500 to 1,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition to repel. We receive 1,000 rounds per gun per day. If we 3 or 4 American attacks per day, which is common, we exhaust our ammunition allocation. Without ammunition, the machine guns are useless. Without machine guns, our riflemen cannot stop American advances. The American semi-automatic rifle has created a tactical situation we cannot counter with our current weapons and ammunition supplies. The MG-42's high rate of fire, once an overwhelming advantage, had become a liability when ammunition was constrained and targets were dispersed. German gunners found themselves expending enormous quantities of ammunition against advancing American squads while achieving limited casualties due to the dispersed nature of walking fire formations. Meanwhile, the continuous rifle fire from advancing Americans was achieving its purpose, suppressing the machine gun crew and enabling the advance to continue. The tactical evolution did not stop with simple walking fire. Experienced American units developed variations and refinements. Some squads would split into 2 elements, with one element providing higher volume suppressive fire from a stationary position, while the other element conducted walking fire advance. Once the advancing element reached a suitable position, the two would reverse roles. This leapfrog variation of walking fire allowed for even heavier suppressive fire and reduced casualties among the advancing element. Other units incorporated indirect fire weapons into walking fire attacks. The M1 Garand could launch rifle grenades using a specialized launcher attached to the muzzle. Some squads would include 2 or 3 rifle grenadiers who would fire rifle grenades toward enemy positions during the walking fire advance, adding high explosive impact to the suppressive rifle fire. This was particularly effective against bunkers and fortified positions where rifle fire alone might be insufficient. Lieutenant James Morrison, a platoon leader with the 4th Infantry Division, described a walking fire assault that incorporated these variations during combat in the Hürtgen Forest in November 1944. We needed to take a German bunker position. Intelligence indicated at least 2 machine gun crews, plus supporting infantry, perhaps 20 to 25 Germans total. Standard approach would be to call for artillery, then assault after the barrage. But artillery was scarce that day, committed to supporting other units. So we used walking fire. I had 2 squads, 24 men total. I positioned one squad on line, told them to deliver maximum fire on the bunker position. The other squad I split into 2 fire teams. First fire team began walking fire advance from the left flank. 3 men with M1s firing continuously, 1 BAR gunner firing bursts, 2 men with rifle grenades firing grenades every 20 to 30 yards. The second fire team did the same from the right flank. The idea was to create a crossfire while advancing from 2 directions. The Germans couldn't effectively engage both advancing elements simultaneously. The machine guns would fire at one element, then traverse to fire at the other element, but they couldn't suppress both. We lost 2 men wounded during the advance, but we closed to grenade range and destroyed both machine gun crews. Total time from initiating walking fire to securing the position was approximately 8 to 10 minutes. Morrison's account concludes with an observation about German responses. The Germans were excellent soldiers. If they had possessed semi-automatic rifles, they could have used similar tactics against us. But they were equipped with bolt-action rifles, and their doctrine was built around machine guns. They never adapted effectively to our walking fire tactics, because adaptation would have required completely re-equipping their infantry with different weapons, which was impossible given their industrial situation by late 1944. We had the weapon that enabled the tactic. They did not. The psychological transformation experienced by German soldiers who encountered walking fire tactics repeatedly represented a fundamental shift in confidence that mirrored the broader trajectory of the war. German infantry in 1943 and early 1944 still believed in their tactical superiority over American forces. By late 1944 and early 1945, that confidence had evaporated, replaced by a defensive mentality focused on survival rather than victory. Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich, the machine gunner whose perspective opened this account, survived his first encounter with American walking fire tactics on October 8, 1944, in the Hürtgen Forest. His diary, captured by American forces when his unit surrendered in February 1945, provides detailed documentation of how repeated exposure to these tactics affected German soldiers' morale and tactical thinking. Dietrich's October 8th entry reads, "American infantry attacked our position at dawn. Approximately 1 platoon, perhaps 30 to 40 men. We had excellent fields of fire, good cover, 2 MG-42 positions with interlocking fire zones. I was confident we could stop them easily. They began advancing at approximately 200 meters range. I opened fire, traversing across their line. I saw several men fall, but the others did not stop. They did not seek cover. They continued walking forward, and every man was firing his rifle continuously. The sound was extraordinary, not the crack of individual shots, but a continuous roar of rifle fire. Bullets were hitting everywhere around my position. I continued firing, but I had to keep my head down. My assistant gunner was hit, I believe, by rifle fire, though there was so much shooting I could not be certain. I changed the barrel myself, resumed firing, but the Americans were now at 100 meters and still advancing, still firing. I made the decision to abandon the gun and withdraw. I am not proud of this, but I believed I would die if I remained at the position." The entry continues with Dietrich's reflection on the engagement. "We were taught that the machine gun is the supreme weapon of infantry combat. That machine gun crews who maintain fire discipline and conserve ammunition can hold positions against vastly superior numbers. But the Americans have changed the rules. Their semi-automatic rifles allow them to generate machine gun-like volumes of fire from every soldier. When 10 men are all firing continuously while advancing, the machine gun's rate of fire advantage becomes meaningless. I do not know how we are supposed to counter this tactic with the weapons we possess." Dietrich's subsequent diary entries document his unit's deteriorating situation as American attacks continued throughout October and November. October 15th, another American attack today, same tactics, walking forward under continuous rifle fire. We abandoned our positions before they closed to grenade range. Casualties: 3 dead, 5 wounded, all from rifle fire during the advance. We destroyed no Americans. November 2nd. I am no longer assigned as MG-42 gunner. There are not enough men willing to serve in machine gun crews. I now carry a Kar 98K rifle. I feel safer as a rifleman than I did as a machine gunner. The Americans specifically target machine gun positions with their walking fire. German casualty reports from units facing American forces in the last year of the war show disproportionately high casualties among machine gun crews. A study conducted by the U.S. Army's Historical Division after the war, analyzing German casualty data from October 1944 through May 1945, found that machine gun crew casualties in units facing American forces averaged 40% higher than casualties among riflemen in the same units. The report attributed this disparity primarily to American walking fire tactics, which deliberately concentrated fire on machine gun positions. The Hürtgen Forest campaign, from September 1944 through February 1945, provided the most sustained test of walking fire tactics against prepared German defences. The forest, located along the German-Belgian border, consisted of dense woodland with limited visibility, steep ravines, and numerous concrete bunkers built as part of the Siegfried Line fortifications. Staff Sergeant Harold Fischer, a squad leader with the 28th Infantry Division, fought in the Hürtgen Forest from November 2nd through November 13th, 1944. His oral history interview, conducted in 1946, provides tactical detail on walking fire employment in close terrain. The forest was so thick you couldn't see more than 50, maybe 75 yards in most places. German bunkers were everywhere, usually 2 or 3 machine guns per bunker. We'd deploy on line, 8 to 10 men, and advance while firing. In that thick forest, at close range, the volume of fire was devastating. Germans couldn't maintain fire from their bunker apertures because we were hitting the apertures with concentrated rifle fire. We'd close to grenade range, usually 20 to 30 yards, throw grenades into the apertures, then assault the position. Fisher's account emphasizes the casualty differential. We took casualties doing this. You couldn't advance toward bunkers without getting hit sometimes. But our casualties were lower than German casualties because they had to expose themselves to return fire, and when they did, 10 rifles would engage them immediately. I estimate our casualty ratio in bunker assaults was approximately 1 American casualty for every 3 to 4 German casualties. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's final major offensive in the West, launched on December 16, 1944, provided German forces with one last opportunity to employ their defensive doctrine. The initial German assault achieved surprise, but as American reinforcements arrived and the offensive stalled, German units found themselves fighting from hastily prepared defensive positions against American counterattacks. Lieutenant Werner Vogel, a platoon leader with the 12th SS Panzer Division, experienced the reversal during the Bulge. His account, recorded during post-war interrogation in May 1945, describes the shift from offensive success to defensive failure. During the first days we advanced rapidly. Then the weather cleared, American aircraft appeared, and their reinforcements began arriving. By December 22nd, we were ordered to establish defensive positions and hold against American counterattacks. This is when we learned how effective American infantry tactics had become. Vogel continues, "We occupied positions in a tree line overlooking open ground. American infantry, I believe from the 101st Airborne Division, began attacking on December 23rd. They advanced across the open ground in extended lines, all rifles firing continuously. Our machine guns opened fire at time, and 300 meters. The Americans did not stop. At 150 meters, I could hear their rifle fire impacting our positions, continuous, unrelenting fire. My machine gun crews were ducking behind cover, unable to maintain continuous fire because American bullets were hitting all around the gun positions. At 100 meters, one of my machine gun crews abandoned their weapon and retreated. The other crew was killed, I believe, by rifle fire. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German military leadership recognized the tactical problem and attempted various countermeasures. Some units experimented with increased machine gun density, positioning 3 or 4 MG-42 seconds per platoon instead of the standard 2. This had limited success. While additional machine guns provided more firepower, they also presented more targets for American walking fire and required more ammunition, which was increasingly scarce. The most effective German response, developed through hard experience, was immediate counterattack. When Americans employed walking fire, German reserve forces would attempt to counterattack from flanks before they could consolidate captured positions. This tactic required maintaining reserves close enough to intervene quickly and precise communications, which American artillery often disrupted. Hauptmann Friedrich Schmidt, a company commander with the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, described the counterattack doctrine. We learned that once Americans began their walking fire advance, our forward positions could not stop them. Our only option was to counterattack from positions not under direct American fire. We would position one platoon forward, one platoon in reserve 100 to 150 meters behind. When Americans attacked using walking fire, the reserve would counterattack from the flank. This sometimes worked if we achieved surprise. More often, American squad leaders anticipated this response and positioned elements to cover likely counterattack routes. By early 1945, German defensive doctrine had evolved into a grim calculus of delay rather than decisive defense. Units were expected to inflict casualties and delay American advances, then withdraw before being overrun. The confident defensive doctrine of earlier war years had been abandoned. Oberst Heinrich Müller, whose earlier report documented his regiment's inability to counter American tactics, was captured in February 1945. His final assessment represents perhaps the clearest German recognition of the tactical revolution. The American M1 rifle has fundamentally altered infantry combat. German doctrine assumed that machine guns would dominate infantry battles, but the M1 rifle allows American infantry squads to generate suppressive fire comparable to light machine guns while retaining mobility and flexibility. When every man in an American squad can fire as rapidly as our machine guns can traverse from target to target, our machine gun advantage disappears. This is not a matter of courage or training, it is weapons technology. The Americans have superior weapons and tactics that exploit this superiority. We cannot counter these tactics with bolt-action rifles. The tactical lessons learned by American forces regarding walking fire were systematically analyzed and incorporated into official doctrine. The infantry school at Fort Benning conducted extensive studies, interviewing returning officers and enlisted men about effective tactics. Walking fire, initially developed through practical experience, was formally incorporated into updated infantry tactical manuals by 1945, FM 7-10. Infantry Rifle Company was revised in March 1945 to include specific instructions. When assaulting enemy positions, rifle squads should advance under continuous fire. Each rifleman will fire at a steady rate, 2, 3 rounds every 3 to 5 seconds, while advancing toward the enemy position. Fire should be directed at the general area of enemy positions, rather than aimed at specific targets. The objective is to suppress enemy fire through volume and continuity, while maintaining forward momentum. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Army's Operational Research Office, published in 1948, quantified the tactical advantage. The study analyzed 127 small unit actions where American rifle squads assaulted German positions. Actions employing walking fire achieved objectives in 78% of cases, with average American casualties of 2.3 men per squad and average German casualties of 5.7 men. Actions employing traditional fire and movement achieved objectives in 61% of cases, with average American casualties of 3.1 men and German casualties of 4.2 men. The study concluded, walking fire tactics provide significant tactical advantages. Success rate is 17 percentage points higher. American casualties are approximately 25% lower. German casualties are approximately 35% higher. The primary factor enabling effectiveness is the M1 rifle's semi-automatic capability. This tactic would not be feasible with bolt-action rifles. The implications extended beyond immediate battlefield effectiveness. Walking fire represented a fundamental shift in infantry combat philosophy that would influence military doctrine for decades. Traditional infantry combat had been characterized by distinct phases: suppression, movement, assault. Walking fire collapsed these phases into a single, continuous action. This required different soldier skills and unit training. Squad leaders had to manage continuous movement while maintaining fire control. Individual riflemen had to fire accurately while moving, something traditional marksmanship training from static positions did not emphasize. The American military's adoption of these tactics represented recognition that infantry combat had fundamentally changed, driven by technology, but realized through tactical innovation at small unit level. German forces never developed effective counters, because counters would have required equipping infantry with semi-automatic rifles, which Germany's industrial base could not support. Germany did develop the Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifle, with approximately 400,000 produced, but too few for general issue. The Sturmgewehr 44, combining rifle range with submachine gun rate of fire, saw approximately 425,000 produced between 1943 and 45. Most German infantry ended the war still armed with Kar 98K bolt-action rifles. For German soldiers who survived, facing American walking fire tactics left lasting impressions. In post-war interviews and memoirs, German veterans consistently identified American semi-automatic rifles and the tactics they enabled as among the most significant challenges they faced. The psychological impact of being unable to effectively return fire contributed to the sense of inevitable defeat that permeated German forces in the war's final months. Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich survived and returned home in May 1945. In a 1951 interview, he reflected, "Against the Russians, I always felt the machine gun gave us decisive advantage. Against the Americans, I never felt that advantage. Their tactics and rifles negated our machine gun superiority. When I think about the war, I remember the fear as an American squad advanced, every man firing continuously, knowing that if I remained at my gun, I would likely be killed. That fear, the knowledge that our best weapon could not stop their attacks, was the moment I understood we would lose the war." The M1 Garand continued in service through the Korean War and into early Vietnam, finally replaced by the M14 in 1957. Walking fire tactics influenced American doctrine for subsequent conflicts. Modern American infantry doctrine still emphasizes continuous fire while maneuvering, though terminology has changed to suppression and fire superiority. The tactical revolution demonstrates a fundamental truth. Technological advantages must be exploited through tactical adaptation. The M1 Garand provided potential advantages, but those advantages were realized only when junior leaders developed tactics exploiting the weapon's capabilities. The rifle itself did not win battles. Soldiers using the rifle in innovative ways won battles. German experience demonstrates the consequences of failing to adapt. German doctrine, proved effective in earlier conflicts, could not adapt quickly enough to counter American innovations. By the time Germany began producing semi-automatic rifles in significant numbers, the war was lost. When Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich crouched behind his MG-42 inches the Hürtgen Forest that October morning in 1944, he believed his weapon gave him unquestionable superiority. German doctrine, training, and combat experience all supported that belief. But American riflemen advancing through those trees, M1 Garands firing steadily as they walked forward, were about to demonstrate that the rules had changed. The machine gun's rate of fire advantage had been negated by semi-automatic rifles in the hands of well-trained infantry using aggressive tactics. German infantry never expected that American rifle squads could suppress machine gun positions through rifle fire alone. Walking fire tactics shattered those assumptions. American rifle squads discovered they could be their own supporting weapons, that semi-automatic rifles employed aggressively could achieve what German doctrine insisted was impossible. Klaus Dietrich's diary entry from February 14, 1945, written shortly before his unit's surrender, captures this psychological transformation. "We have been ordered to hold our positions. We have excellent positions, concrete bunkers, good fields of fire. But I no longer believe we can stop them. They will advance under fire, their rifles never silent, and we will retreat or die. This is not defeatism. It is realism born from experience. The Americans have better weapons used with better tactics. We cannot counter this with courage alone." 11 days later, on February 25th, Dietrich's unit surrendered to the 78th Infantry Division. His final diary entry provides a fitting conclusion. "The war is over for me. I survived when many comrades did not. I learned that bravery and good equipment are not enough if the enemy has both better equipment and better tactics." The Americans had both. Their semi-automatic rifles, combined with their walking fire tactics, gave them advantages we could not overcome. I do not believe German soldiers were less brave or less skilled, but we were armed with inferior weapons and employed according to doctrine that could not counter American tactics. This is why we lost. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.